48 years old, freshly single, and running low on options. The relationship had ended badly. The apartment we'd shared went with it. I had a few $100s saved, a truck that needed new tires, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from working too hard, but from having nothing to work toward. I was staying with a friend in Akron, sleeping on a couch that was 2 inches too short for me, trying to figure out what came next. That's when I found the ad. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Just scrolling Craigslist the way you do when you're between things. Half hoping, not expecting much. The listing stopped me cold. Farm caretaker needed, southeastern Ohio, secluded property. Owner traveling for business, needed someone reliable to watch the place. $300 a week, cash. Housing included. It mentioned that over 100 people had already applied, which I remember thinking was strange for a job most people wouldn't bother with. But that detail also made it feel legitimate. Real jobs have competition. I sent a message before I'd finished reading it twice. The reply came the next morning. 2 days later, a phone call. The man on the other end spoke slowly, no rush to him. The kind of voice that belongs to someone who owns land and knows it. He said his name was Jack. He said they'd narrowed it down to a handful of finalists, and I was one of them. All I had to do was come out, meet him in person, take a look at the property, and we'd go from there. I told my friend where I was going. He said it sounded too good to be true. I told him farm jobs always sound too good to be true because nobody wants them. I wrote down the diner where Jack had asked me to meet him, left it on the kitchen counter, and went to bed early so I'd be sharp for the interview. I remember thinking, driving out the next morning, that things were finally turning around. The diner was ordinary. A booth by the window, eggs I didn't finish, bad coffee that Jack ordered and never touched. He was heavyset, somewhere in his 50s, with a broad, easy manner that made him simple to be around. He asked about my background, listened more than he talked, and laughed once at something I said. There was a teenager with him. His nephew, Jack said, helped out around the property. The boy sat at the end of the booth and looked at his hands. We finished up and Jack said the farm was about 20 minutes out. He said we'd take his car, a white Buick, and come back for my truck after. I didn't think anything of it, but 20 minutes became 30, then 40. The 2-lane road leaving town narrowed gradually, shedding mailboxes and hand-painted signs until there was nothing on either side but tree line. The pavement gave way to gravel. The gravel gave way to dirt. The trees pressed closer, and the light through the windshield went pale and flat, the color of late afternoon even though it was still morning. I told myself farms are rural. That's just what this looks like. The car stopped. Jack said they'd left some equipment down the hill, tools we'd need to carry up before looking around the property. He was already out of the car. The boy was already standing in the road. I climbed out onto the dirt and heard the quiet close in around me, the specific stillness of somewhere with no traffic, no machinery, nothing electrical within earshot, just my footsteps. And behind me, 2 sets of footsteps that I hadn't asked to follow me. I kept walking, told myself it was fine. But my chest had gone tight in a way I couldn't explain, and the back of my neck felt cold. And I found myself counting my own steps without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. The way you count things when part of you is paying attention to something your brain hasn't named yet. The hill sloped down through dense brush. I watched my footing on the uneven ground. Behind me, Jack moved without hurrying. The nephew was quiet. I still had no phone signal. Hadn't had one for the last 10 minutes of the drive. Then I heard it. A small sound behind me and slightly to the left. My brain identified it before I'd consciously decided to listen. A gun hammer drawn back. I turned. The bullet hit my elbow. Not pain, not at first. Just a profound wrongness, like the world had skipped a frame. My arm swung outward and I stumbled sideways, and then I was moving, crashing through brush, with one arm useless at my side, the other grabbing at branches, at anything solid. Behind me, Jack was shouting. Then the shots came. Not one, not two, round after round, tearing into the brush where I disappeared. I didn't look back. I ran the way you run when fear is bigger than pain, low, fast, putting trees between me and the sound until the sound stopped. I had no signal, no road, no idea if they were behind me, but I couldn't stop, so I didn't. I pushed through undergrowth for what felt like an hour, maybe longer, bleeding steadily from my elbow, the arm swelling into something unrecognizable. I found a creek and waded through it without thinking. On the other side, the forest looked exactly the same. Dense, indifferent, no landmark I could use. I navigated by the fading light, heading what I believed was south, falling twice and getting back up both times. I told myself, next tree, next 50 meters. Just that, nothing else. The light was nearly gone when the trees opened onto a field. On the far side was a farmhouse, single window lit. I crossed the open ground without looking back, quickly because if I slowed down, I might not start again. I knocked on the door. The couple who answered took one look at me and stepped aside. I asked them to call the police. They were already reaching for the phone. I sat on their floor and waited. The investigation took days to fully assemble, and what it revealed was worse than anything I'd imagined on that hillside. Jack's real name was Richard Beasley, 52 years old, from Akron, a lay preacher. He had a wife and a congregation who knew him as a man of faith. He also had a Craigslist account and a stretch of woodland in southeastern Ohio, and a 16-year-old accomplice named Brogan Rafferty, who he'd introduced to me as his nephew. The ad had been running for weeks before I answered it. Beasley had used it to lure unemployed men, specifically men between things, men without fixed addresses, men whose disappearance might not trigger immediate alarm, to that property. I was not the first. David Pauley, 51, from Norfolk, Virginia. Ralph Geiger, 56, from Akron. Timothy Kern, 47, from Massillon, Ohio. 3 men who had answered the same ad, made the same drive, and never come back. Their bodies were found in shallow graves within a mile of where I'd been standing when I heard the hammer pulled back. The ground hadn't been disturbed enough to notice from the road. When investigators accessed Beasley's Craigslist account, it was still active. There were unread messages in the inbox from men who hadn't heard back yet. One had written to apologize for missing a scheduled meeting and asked if the position was still available. I don't know if he ever found out what he'd nearly walked into. Beasley was convicted in 2013 on 3 counts of aggravated murder and sentenced to death. Rafferty received life in prison. At his sentencing, Rafferty said he was sorry. Beasley said nothing that mattered. What changed for me is harder to explain than the facts. I still drive past job listings on Craigslist sometimes, and sometimes I stop on one that looks right. The right pay, the right location, the right tone, and I feel that specific pull, that reasonable hopefulness, and I understand all over again how little it takes. Not desperation, not stupidity, just need, pointed in a direction someone else chose for you. The ad said over 100 people had applied. The police were never able to account for all of them.